Welcome to the Apple for the Teacher podcast, the true crime podcast that features the good apples and the bad apples within the school system. My name is Anna Thomas, a teacher and your host. So join me as I present school stories that are tragic, shocking, unbelievable, and outright bizarre. Hello everyone, this is episode 16. First, I need to give an apology. I was editing the last episode and by mistake I hit the publish button instead of the save button. So the episode was released, but it wasn't finished yet, and it had all of my bloopers. Before I realised, it had about 30 plays. So my apologies to those of you who thought, what on earth is happening here? You know, they really should have a button that says, are you sure you want to publish? I'd also like to give you a little trick if for some reason you can't play an episode. Sometimes we have issues with our podcast host. Just recently, podcasters were not able to publish episodes. So if this ever happens, Apple for the Teacher is also on YouTube, so this is a good backup if all else fails. Now I'd like to say hello to our new Facebook group members, Jessica Picara Blevins, Bev Jones, and Anthony Corey Alacon. Hello to all of you. I hope I said your names correctly, so please let me know if I didn't. Also, I received another wonderful review on iTunes from Jules, who said, "Great podcast, well researched, relates the story in a compassionate, caring way." Thank you so much, Jules. I'm really glad that it comes across that way because I really do spend a lot of time on the research, and I also really get invested in the stories because as a teacher I could find myself in many of the situations that in the stories, so I can relate to them even though it's never actually happened to me. And actually, today's first story is about something that could easily happen to me. But before we start, let's do the country focus today, which is Iceland. So hello if you're from Iceland. Beer remained illegal in Iceland until 1989. Iceland had the first democratically elected female and openly gay prime ministers. The consumption of Coca-Cola per capita is higher than any other country. Icelanders watch more movies than any other nation. And there aren't any McDonald's restaurants anywhere in Iceland. When I first found out this fact about Iceland, I found another story about McDonald's, which is just too bizarre to be real, but apparently it is. The last McDonald's store closed in Iceland in 2009. The very last meal was purchased by a man who wanted to test the theory that a McDonald's meal will never decompose. So he bought a meal of a burger and fries and kept it sealed in a plastic bag to see what would happen. 10 years later, the meal is virtually still intact. It's now on display in a hostel and has become a tourist attraction in Iceland. People even take selfies with it. And what's more bizarre is that the meal is live streamed on a website. I kid you not. I've had a look and the camera is focused on the meal 24/7. I just love finding such interesting stories. So if you live in Iceland, let me know if you've seen it yourself. I will put the photos on social media and a link to the live stream. All right, so let's preview the stories for today. The first bad apple is called Buried Alive. A school bus trip doesn't go as planned. Why? The second good apple story is called Zero Tolerance. A teacher gave a student a 0 mark. What happened? This bad apple story took place in 1976 in California, USA. It was the second to last day of summer school. A class of 26 school children from the Dairyland Elementary School had spent the hot July day at their local swimming pool. The children ranged in age from 5 to 14. One of the students recalled, "We loved summer school. It was such a good time. We did arts and crafts, woodwork, ceramics. I just remember doing water balloon tosses, and we'd play fun games like Truth and Dare out in the park." They enjoyed summer school so much that one of the students started a petition asking if they could have 2 more weeks of summer school. At the end of the day, their high school bus driver, Frank Edward Ray, was transporting the children back to school. He was known to everyone as Edward or just Ed. On their way back, they suddenly came across a van blocking the road with its hood up. Ed thought maybe they were having car trouble and stopped to see if he could help. He was immediately confronted by 3 armed men with nylon stockings covering their faces. 2 of the men got onto the bus, pointing their guns at the students, with one man holding a gun to Ed and taking him to the back of the bus. One man then started driving the bus, while the third man followed behind in the van. They were driven through thick bamboo, which was as high as the bus. The drive was very bumpy, and they were being shaken around. When they finally came to a stop, there was another van waiting. They were all herded into the 2 vans at gunpoint. The windows of the vans had been blacked out. They were driven for 11 hours, with one student recalling, "It was hot. It was over 100 degrees. No water, no bathroom." The vans finally came to a stop in a rock and gravel quarry. It was discovered later that the quarry was owned by one of the gunmen's fathers. It was now the early hours of the next morning. The quarry was dark, except for one construction light. They noticed a large hole in the ground, and in that hole was a removal truck that had been buried into the earth. One student said, "It was buried into the earth. It was like a tomb. It was like a coffin. It was like a giant coffin for all of us." They were forced down a ladder into the buried truck. The ladder was removed when everyone was inside. There was a small amount of food and water and some mattresses. A toilet was made from a cardboard box. There were fans, but these failed after the batteries had died. A foul stench soon filled the air from the children's vomit and urine. The kidnappers never said why they were abducted, but asked everyone for their name, age, address, and phone number. They also took one item of clothing from each child. Meanwhile, their abandoned school bus had been found by a pilot flying his plane. The police discovered no blood or any signs of foul play. So at that stage, everyone was hopeful that they would be found alive. With none of the kidnappers there, they had to try to find a way to escape. "If we're going to die, we're going to die doing something," a student called Jennifer said. "We're not going to die sitting here." So they managed to stack a pile of mattresses high enough to reach a metal plate in the roof. But they soon discovered the plate was covered with dirt and a large truck battery. They somehow managed to wedge the plate open with a piece of wood and moved the battery. then dug through the rest of the dirt and debris. One of the students, named Linda, was feeling very anxious as they were trying to dig through the dirt. She said, "Are they up there waiting for us? Are we going to get shot for coming out? Because all you saw with them were the guns." But after 16 hours of captivity, and by some miracle, they were able to climb on each other's shoulders and flee. And the timing was incredible, as they found out later that the kidnappers had been asleep. They staggered to a small building. Linda recalls, "There was a man up above, one man, and he knew exactly who we were before we even said anything. The man came down and said, 'The world's been looking for you.' He knew exactly who we were." After 27 hours, the ordeal was finally over, and you can imagine what the reunion with the families was like. The son of the quarry owner quickly came under suspicion, as he had keys to the premises. He and two of his friends had previously been convicted of grand theft auto. The quarry owner's property was searched, where police found one of the guns used in the kidnapping and a draft ransom note. But by that time, the three men had fled. Two of the men were captured 2 weeks later, and the other man handed himself in. The kidnappers had been unable to follow through on their ransom demand of $5 million. They had tried to call the police department, but the phone lines were blocked with calls from the families of the children and the media. That's karma for you. All three men had come from wealthy families, but had been in debt. They had heard the state of California was experiencing a $1 million surplus, so thought that they could spare $5 million. They decided it would be best to kidnap multiple children for a large ransom. The children would offer no resistance, and they reasoned the state would not refuse a ransom for precious, vulnerable children. They were sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole. One of the men was released in 2012 and the other in 2015. And only last month, in October, the third man was denied parole for the 19th time, and his next parole hearing will be in 2024. The denials were based on the fact that he continued to minimize his crime, and he also had been in possession of contraband in the form of pornography and cell phones. For many of the children, life after the ordeal was tough. Many suffered from panic attacks, nightmares involving kidnappings and death, and personality changes. Many became afraid of cars, the dark, the wind, the kitchen, mice, and dogs. One even shot a man whose car had broken down in the front of his house. Some of the children suffered from substance abuse and depression, and even were diagnosed with claustrophobia. One of the students, Jennifer, said that even her own children had suffered from what happened to her. Quote, "If you have a very protective parent, which would be myself, your children don't get to lead a normal life. Get on a bus, go on a field trip, stay the night with a friend, and that's been very difficult. It's been a life of hard work, trying to be normal. It's not normal for someone who's almost 50 years old to be afraid of the dark. The types of nightmares I have. I was prepared to die. I actually had nightmares where somebody killed me. I saw myself at my own funeral." In 2016, all of the children filed a lawsuit against the kidnappers. What was discovered during the court case was incredible. The third kidnapper, while still in prison, had a number of businesses he was running, including a gold mine and a car dealership, which was obviously illegal. He had purchased a mansion only 30 minutes from the prison and had married 3 times. He had inherited a trust fund from his parents. The lawsuit was settled out of court, with the money coming from the kidnappers' own trust fund. I love this. All the easy money he got from Mummy and Daddy went to the victims. Now that's karma. The bus driver, Edward, had lived in the area all of his life. Only 2 months after the kidnapping, he went back to work. And get this, he drove the very same bus involved in the kidnapping. That is just so amazing. He retired in 1988, 12 years after the incident, and he bought the bus himself for $500, as he didn't want it to be demolished in a junkyard. It was kept on his farm and eventually donated to a local museum. I have a picture of the bus at the museum, which you can see on social media. Edward received a California School Employees Association citation for outstanding community service. And every February the 26th, the day of the escape, has been declared Edward Ray Day in Chowchilla. He had been interviewed many times about the ordeal and said he had been frightened right from the start until the very end. He said, quote, "If it happened again, I'd do the same things again, except I wouldn't stop for a van on the road." In 1993, a movie was made of the kidnapping, with the actor Carl Malden playing Edward. The movie is called They've Taken Our Children, the Chowchilla Kidnapping. I watched it on YouTube and will provide you with a link in social media. It just makes you fully understand what they went through, that it wasn't a fictional story. You know, I research these stories in print, but to see it dramatised really brings it to life. All the parents had been gathered together just waiting for news, and when they announced that they had been found, I found myself getting really emotional. The absolute terror that those poor kids went through buried like that. So I highly recommend for you to watch it. Edward sadly passed away in 2012 at the age of 91. He had worked as a bus driver in the district for 40 years. His family said he wasn't a big talker and rarely spoke about what had happened. His granddaughter said, "He did not think of himself as a hero. It was just something that happened. He was the most humble man you ever met in your life. He would do anything for anybody." 4 years ago, a park was dedicated to Edward. I found a video of the ceremony, which you can see on social media. His wife, Odessa, was still alive and she was actually there. So, what do you think of that story? What I found interesting is that there was no teacher on the bus. I know it was summer school, but you would think that there would have been an adult with them on the bus. It's really interesting how things have changed over time. We need to have a ratio of 1 to 15. So with every 15 students, there needs to be one teacher. So for 30 students, that would be 2 teachers. And I always usually bring parent helpers as well. There are some very fantastic black and white photos of the incident, which I will put on social media for you to see yourself. They went to such lengths to dig that huge hole in which to bury the truck. So I hope you find the photos as interesting as I did. So let's now have a bit of a break before the next story with a couple of podcast recommendations, Murderific and homework is stupid.
Check out the Murderific True Crime Podcast, hosted by Bernadette from the state of Maine. Topics will include some seriously true scary stories about serial killers, mass murderers, familicides, the missing, and unsolved cases. Go to www.murderific.com to start listening now or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Until then, we will be executing podcasts one crime at a time.
Hi, I'm Lauren Bongiovanni. I'm a mom, a school psychologist, and the host of Homework is Stupid, the podcast that talks about the issues of our kids and brings together research and expert opinion to help us better understand it. Check out my episode on the psychological aftermath of school lockdown drills. You can find it at homeworkisstupid.com. Please subscribe, check out the podcast episode, and you can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, and any place else that you listen to your podcasts.
This next story deals with how teachers mark student work. If you're a teacher, I'd like you to answer this question. Let's say you have set an assessment for your students. You provide them with a due date and plenty of reminders. If a student fails to submit the work by the due date, what grade would you give them? If you're not a teacher, what would you imagine a teacher in this situation would do or should do? I also need to add, we're talking about high school, not primary school. Well, the teacher at the centre of this story was in this exact situation. This story took place in Florida in the US last year in 2018. The teacher's name was Diane Tirado, and she had been a teacher for 17 years. She had given her students a notebook project and 2 weeks to complete it. The task required students to keep an explorer's notebook in the same way a 15th century explorer might have kept a journal in their time. Some students did not hand the project in, and therefore she gave them a 0 mark. So compare the mark she gave with the mark that you would have given. So what happened to this teacher? Well, she was sacked. At the meeting she had with the school principal, he reminded her of the school's no 0 marking policy. Here is a summary of the policy. It says, students cannot receive a 0, with the lowest mark possible being 50%. The policy was clearly stated in their student and parent handbook. A student would receive an A grade for 90 to 100%, B for 80 to 89, C for 70 to 79, D for 60 to 69, and F for 50 to 59. Then, in large block letters in red, it states, no zeros. The lowest possible grade is 50%. Now, there is also one further piece of information I need to provide you. On the very same table where this marking policy was located, under the F mark, there is another mark called the I mark, which stands for incomplete. And the percentage for an incomplete task is 0. Yes, 0. So it seems to totally contradict the so-called no 0 mark. So as you can imagine, the teacher involved in this case was very confused. Before leaving, she posted a message on her classroom whiteboard saying, "Bye kids, Mrs. Tirado loves you and wishes you the best in life. I have been fired for refusing to give you 50% for not handing anything in. Love, Mrs. Tirado." She took a photo of the whiteboard message and posted it on Facebook. The post was shared thousands of times and her sacking caused an outrage. One person posted the following quote, This shows what is wrong with our society today. The people that will run our future are the people still getting credit for doing nothing." End quote. She was approached by various media outlets for an interview and said this, quote, "If there's nothing to grade, how can I give somebody 50%? I'm arguing the fact that you don't get something for nothing. I want the policy changed, and it's not just here. I'm so upset because we have a nation of kids that are expecting to get paid and live their life just for showing up, and it's not real." End quote. After the post went viral, she received a lot of support for her stance and vowed to keep up the fight for change. Quote, "The reason I took on this fight was because it was ridiculous. Teaching should not be this hard. Teachers teach content, children do the assignments to the best of their ability, and teachers grade that work based on a grading scale that has been around for a very long time. Teachers also provide numerous attempts to get the work collected so that they can give the child a grade. By nature, most teachers are loving souls who want to see their students succeed." End quote. The school superintendent, E. Wayne Gent, defended the school's no-zero policy, saying it ensured struggling students didn't fall behind. He said, quote, "You want to make sure that the grades themselves are not punitive in nature. Students are required to meet certain standards. If you don't meet it on the first shot, then we're going to give you other opportunities to meet it. The easy way is to say, okay, we're going to move on and leave you behind. And that student is going to be unsuccessful. That's not the culture that we've established in the school district. 50% is still a failing grade. We're not making it easy for students. It's holding them accountable. It's rigor. It's hard work. We want to make it more difficult to fail than easier to succeed." End quote. So clearly, this story highlights the two different approaches to school grading. The school stance is sometimes referred to as the participation trophy, where participation is said to boost self-esteem and gives recognition which improves confidence. But critics of this style say that by eliminating the concept of a loser, this hinders children from reaching their potential. Following the incident, there was a lot of debate on social media. Here are some of the comments. One person said, "No wonder China and India are passing us. They actually have expectations of their students, and if they don't deserve to pass, they don't." Another person said, "I taught in a school which didn't allow any grade below 50%. I didn't have a problem with it because I understood why it was implemented. The reason? Children won't give up. Giving up often leads to truancy and/or discipline issues and eventually dropping out." Here's another comment. "Where in life, once they graduate and start working, can you not show up and still be expected to collect 50% of your paycheck? If your child refused to clean their room, would you still take them to the movies and ice cream?" And here's a final quote from the teacher at the centre of this story. "The fight has gotten real. News stations everywhere are discussing school policy and questioning what we are doing to our youth. Already, I have reached my goal by creating conversation about a very serious topic. I hope this conversation will create policy change. Thank you all for your support." End quote. Clearly, it's a very contentious issue. So where do you stand? As a teacher myself, I prefer the 50% mark rather than giving zeros. I guess it depends on whether you are a primary teacher or a high school teacher. As a primary teacher, you can imagine how it would destroy confidence and self-esteem to give very young children 0 marks. I can't speak for high school, but perhaps you are a high school teacher. What grading system does your school have? If you're a parent, where do you stand on this matter? Do you think a 0 grade demoralises your child? This is one of those topics that can open up a lot of discussion, so I'd like to hear what you think. Why not leave your comments on social media or send me a voice message? I'd like to include your comments in the next episode. Now I'd like you to listen to these audio clips. You may remember I had spoken about a Facebook member from Poland and had tried to pronounce her tricky name. She sent me a voice message. So first listen to how I pronounced her name, and then you will hear her speak. Now I'm going to try to pronounce her name, and it's a very tricky one, and I've been practicing for a few days. I know she will probably have a huge giggle, as will all the other listeners from Poland, but I'm going to try to do my best. So here goes. Okay, let me get my mouth into gear. Her name is Ania Szkopinska. Ania Szkopinska. How was that? Try saying that when you've had a few too many alcoholic beverages. Ania Szkopinska.
Hello, Anna. It's Ania from Poland here. I'd just like to thank you again for your shout out and say that we're really close in pronouncing my surname. I'm just going to say it for you so you know how a native speaker would say it. It's Ania Skrzypińska. So the cluster of K, R, and Z is like skrzh. The sound can be pretty hard to make for non-native Polish speakers. And I would also like to say that I really enjoy listening to your podcast. The episodes are presented in an interesting way, and I always find out something new about other countries as well, how the school system works there. And hopefully talk to you again. Bye.
So there you go. Doesn't she have a fantastic accent, and she speaks such good English? So that's how easy it is to leave a voice message. I'd love to include more of your messages in future episodes, so why not give it a go? As you've seen, it's really not that hard. I'd now like to give you a preview of episode 17. It's called Going, Going, Gone and Bear Hug. Here's a summary. The students went on a school hike, but where was Teresa? The two men gave each other a bear hug. Why? So to end this episode, I will leave you with this quote. If a child can't learn the way we teach, we should teach the way they learn. Bye for now, and remember to be a good apple.